They say death comes in threes, but Marcusjan had already proven that theory wrong twice over. The first time, the plague took him for 6 minutes before his heart stuttered back to life. The second time, organ failure claimed him for nearly an hour while machines breathed for his corpse. Now, as he reached for his third deathberry with trembling fingers, the irony wasn't lost on him that salvation had finally arrived in the form of a 7-foot-tall alien medic who looked more shocked than anyone else in the room. Dr. Zephi had traveled across 3 star systems carrying the cure to humanity's deadliest pandemic, only to find his patient deliberately choosing death over waiting another few minutes for rescue. The contradiction would have been amusing if it weren't so tragically human. Here was a species that fought death with every breath, yet when faced with unbearable suffering, they would choose to end it all rather than endure one moment longer. But Marcusjan wasn't just any human, and this wasn't just another medical emergency. What neither the dying man nor his alien savior knew was that this moment would reshape everything they thought they understood about life, death, and the strange resilience that makes humanity both the most frustrating and most fascinating species in the galaxy. The berry was already touching his lips when their eyes met across the sterile hospital room, and, in that instant, both of their worlds changed forever. Marcusjan had been dying for 3 weeks, though technically he'd been dying for much longer than that. The Crimson Plague had swept through Earth's colonies like wildfire, turning healthy adults into walking corpses within days. Most victims lasted 72 hours before their organs shut down completely. Marcus had somehow stretched that timeline into 21 days of pure agony, setting medical records that nobody wanted to break. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and approaching death. Machines beeped steadily around his bed, monitoring vitals that painted an increasingly grim picture. His skin had taken on the characteristic crimson flush that gave the plague its name, and dark veins were visible beneath the surface like a roadmap to nowhere good. Every breath felt like drowning in reverse. Dr. Sarah Martinez stood at the foot of his bed, her face a mask of professional concern that barely hid her frustration. She'd been his primary physician since the outbreak began, and watching him deteriorate day by day was wearing her down. The man was a fighter, that much was clear, but even fighters had limits. "The pain medication isn't helping anymore," she said quietly, checking his chart on her tablet. "We can increase the dosage, but, at this point, we're looking at keeping you comfortable rather than fighting the disease." Marcus turned his head slowly, each movement requiring enormous effort. His voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "How much longer?" "Hours, maybe less." Sarah's honesty was both cruel and kind. "I'm sorry, Marcus. We've tried everything." But they hadn't tried everything, had they? Marcus knew about the deathberries. Everyone in the terminal ward knew about them. Small purple fruits that grew wild on several colony worlds, completely harmless to healthy humans but deadly to those already weakened by disease. They offered a way out that was quicker and less painful than waiting for organ failure to complete its slow work. Marcus had been thinking about those berries for days. 3 of them sat in a small container on his bedside table, obtained through channels that Dr. Martinez pretended not to know about. Hospital policy officially forbade them, but nurses had been known to look the other way when suffering became unbearable. Sarah noticed his gaze drift to the container. "Marcus, you don't have to make that choice. We can manage your pain." "Can you?" His laugh was more like a cough. "Because it feels like someone's replacing my blood with acid, one drop at a time." Outside his window, the city of New Geneva continued its normal rhythm despite the plague ravaging its population. Hover cars moved between the towering residential blocks, and, in the distance, the spaceport showed the constant flow of ships arriving and departing. Most were medical transports now, bringing supplies that never seemed to be enough. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that he could see the spaceport from his deathbed. He'd worked there for 15 years as a maintenance engineer, keeping the massive cargo handlers running smoothly. It was probably where he'd been exposed to the plague in the first place, working on a transport that had come from the outer colonies where the disease first appeared. His wife Elena had died in this same hospital 2 weeks ago. Same disease, same progression, but she'd gone much faster than him. Maybe that was mercy. Their daughter Sophia was safely off-world, studying at the Mars Technical Institute, and Marcus was grateful she couldn't see him like this. Dr. Martinez was saying something about experimental treatments, but Marcus wasn't really listening anymore. The pain was building again, a wave of agony that started in his chest and radiated outward until even his fingernails hurt. The medication that had once taken the edge off now barely registered against the suffering. His hand moved toward the container of deathberries almost without conscious thought. They were beautiful in their simplicity, small purple orbs that looked like they belonged in a child's fairy tale rather than a medical facility. 3 berries for a man who had already died twice and come back. There was a poetic justice to it that appealed to his engineer's mind. The first time he died, it had been during the initial crisis when his organs began shutting down. The medical team had managed to restart his heart after 6 minutes, long enough for brain damage to be a concern, but somehow he'd come back intact. The second time, he'd been clinically dead for nearly an hour while machines kept his body functioning. Again, against all odds, he'd returned. Now he was facing his third death, and this time it would be by choice. His fingers closed around the first berry, feeling its smooth skin against his palm. Dr. Martinez was still talking, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. "Please, just give us a little more time," she was saying. "There are ships arriving constantly. Someone might have found something." Marcus almost smiled. Hope was such a human thing, wasn't it? Even in the face of certain death, they kept hoping for miracles. But miracles were in short supply these days, and his body was failing faster than hope could sustain it. The berry felt warm in his hand, which was strange because everything else felt cold. His circulation was failing, another sign that the end was approaching. Soon his kidneys would stop filtering toxins from his blood, and the final stage would begin. He'd seen enough other patients go through it to know he didn't want to wait for that. Through the haze of pain and medication, Marcus heard something unusual from the hallway outside his room. Voices, but not the usual hushed tones of medical staff. These voices carried an edge of excitement, almost urgency. He could hear Dr. Martinez's assistant speaking rapidly into her communication device. But whatever was happening out there felt distant and unimportant compared to the immediate reality of his suffering. The berry was already moving toward his mouth when the door to his room burst open. What entered wasn't human. The being was tall, easily 7 feet, with elongated limbs and grayish-blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the hospital lights. Its head was larger than a human's, with eyes that took up much of its face, and it wore what was clearly some kind of environmental suit adapted for a human atmosphere. In its hands, it carried a device that hummed with energy and seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Dr. Martinez stumbled backward, her tablet clattering to the floor. "Security. We need security." But the alien raised one long-fingered hand in what seemed like a universal gesture for peace. When it spoke, its voice was translated by a small device attached to its suit, rendering its words in clear English with only a slight mechanical quality. "Please, do not be alarmed. I am Dr. HFY of the Galactic Medical Corps. I have brought treatment for the plague affecting your species." Marcus's hand stopped halfway to his mouth, the berry suspended between life and death. Through his pain-clouded vision, he stared at this impossible visitor. First contact with an alien species, and it was happening in his hospital room while he was trying to commit suicide. Dr. Martinez found her voice, though it shook slightly. "That's impossible. We've had no contact with alien civilizations." Dr. HFY's large eyes fixed on Marcus, and there was something almost human in their expression despite their alien shape. "Your species' suffering has been detected by our monitoring systems. The plague you face is not unknown to us. We have encountered similar biological agents on 17 different worlds." The alien stepped closer to Marcus's bed, its movements fluid and graceful despite its size. The device in its hands pulsed brighter, and Marcus could feel something changing in the air around him. The constant pain that had been his companion for weeks seemed to ease, just slightly. "The treatment I carry can neutralize the plague organism and begin cellular repair," Dr. HFY continued. "But I require the patient's consent to proceed." Marcus stared at the alien, then at the berry still clutched in his hand. 3 deaths, and now this. A cure arriving at the exact moment he'd chosen to end his suffering. If there was a god, they had a twisted sense of timing. Dr. Martinez had recovered enough to step forward, her medical training overriding her shock. "You're saying you can cure the Crimson Plague? Just like that?" "The process is not instantaneous," Dr. Zephi replied. "But, yes, I can neutralize the pathogen and reverse the damage it has caused. I have already treated 7 worlds affected by similar outbreaks." The alien's eyes remained fixed on Marcus. "However, I have never encountered a patient who was actively choosing death while treatment was available. This presents an ethical dilemma for which my training has not prepared me." Marcus felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside, though it came out as more of a wheeze. "You traveled across space to save me, and I'm sitting here with poison in my hand." "Indeed. It appears that timing, as you humans say, is everything." The berry felt heavier now, weighted with possibility instead of inevitability. Marcus looked at Dr. Martinez, whose face showed a mixture of hope and disbelief. Then, he looked at the alien who had somehow appeared at the exact moment when hope had seemed lost. "If I eat this," Marcus said, raising the berry slightly, "I die in minutes. If I don't, and you're telling the truth, I might live." "Correct. But, if you're wrong, or if this is some kind of hallucination brought on by dying, then I suffer for nothing." Dr. Zephi moved closer, and Marcus could see his own reflection in those enormous eyes. "I cannot prove my authenticity to a mind clouded by pain and approaching death. I can only offer you what I have brought across the stars, hope." Outside, Marcus could hear more commotion in the hallway. Other medical staff were probably being summoned to deal with this unprecedented situation. Soon this room would be full of people, and his quiet moment of choice would become a public spectacle. He had seconds to decide. 3 deaths. 2 had been forced upon him by disease. The third was his to choose. Or maybe, just maybe, the third death could wait. Marcus looked at the berry one more time, then slowly placed it back in the container. "All right, Dr. Zephi. Let's see what you've got." The alien's expression, as far as Marcus could read it, seemed to register relief. "Excellent. Please understand that the treatment process may be uncomfortable initially, but significantly less so than your current state." Dr. Martinez stepped forward, her professional demeanor reasserting itself. "What do you need from us? How can we help?" Dr. Zephi activated the device in his hands, and it began emitting a soft blue light. "Simply observe and record. Your species' medical knowledge may benefit from witnessing this process." As the light from the alien device grew brighter, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks: the absence of pain. Not the dulled ache that medication provided, but actual relief. It started in his chest and spread outward, as if someone was turning down the volume on his suffering. "What is that feeling?" he asked. "Nanobiological agents designed to target the plague organism specifically," Dr. Zephi explained. "They will eliminate the pathogen while simultaneously repairing cellular damage. The process should take approximately 6 of your hours to complete." Marcus closed his eyes and let the relief wash over him. For the first time in weeks, he could breathe without feeling like his lungs were full of broken glass. The constant burning sensation in his blood was fading, replaced by something that felt almost like coolness. When he opened his eyes again, Dr. Martinez was staring at him in amazement. "Your color is already improving," she said. "The crimson flush is fading." Dr. Zephi nodded. "The initial phase targets the most severe symptoms. Full recovery will take longer, but the patient should experience significant improvement within the first hour." Marcus tried to sit up and found that he could, something that had been impossible for days. The weakness was still there, but it no longer felt like an insurmountable weight pressing down on him. "Why?" he asked the alien. "Why come all this way to help strangers?" Dr. Zephi considered the question carefully. "Because suffering diminishes the universe, regardless of which species experiences it. We have the means to help, so we must." It was such a simple answer, and yet it carried the weight of entire civilizations behind it. Marcus had always believed that humans were alone in the universe, that whatever happened to Earth was of consequence only to Earth. The idea that someone had been watching, had cared enough to intervene, was almost harder to process than the cure itself. The door burst open again, and, this time it was Dr. Harrison, the hospital's chief administrator, followed by security guards and, what looked like half the medical staff. They all stopped short when they saw Dr. Zephi standing calmly beside Marcus's bed. "Dr. Martinez, Dr." Harrison said slowly, "Would you mind explaining why there's an alien in my hospital?" "He says he has a cure for the plague," Dr. Martinez replied, gesturing to Marcus, who was sitting up straighter than he had in weeks. Dr. Harrison looked at Marcus, then at the alien, then back at Marcus. "A cure?" "A treatment, to be precise," Dr. Zephi corrected. "And it appears to be working as expected." Marcus could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him. He understood that he had become something more than a dying patient. He was now the first human to be treated by an alien medical procedure. The weight of that realization was almost as heavy as the plague had been. "I feel better," he said, and the understatement of those 3 words made him laugh, which turned into the first genuine laughter he'd experienced since Elena died. Dr. Harrison stepped forward cautiously. "Dr. Zephi, is it? We're going to need to discuss this situation extensively. But, first, do you have enough of this treatment for our other patients?" The alien nodded. "I have sufficient supplies to treat approximately 3,000 individuals. However, I will need assistance in adapting the delivery method for mass distribution." 3,000 lives. Marcus realized he was witnessing not just his own salvation, but, potentially the end of the plague that had devastated Earth's colonies. The berry that had promised him escape from suffering now seemed like a relic from another life, a life where hope had seemed impossible. As the medical staff began asking Dr. Zephi technical questions about the treatment, Marcus settled back against his pillows and marveled at the strange turns that life could take. 3 deaths, and, instead of the final one, he'd received a 4th chance at living. He thought about Elena, who hadn't lived to see this moment, and about Sophia, who would now have a father to return to. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of timing that was both cruel and miraculous. Outside his window, the city of New Geneva continued its rhythm, unaware that everything had just changed. Ships were still arriving at the spaceport, but now they might bring something other than more suffering. Marcus closed his eyes and listened to the alien and human voices discussing treatment protocols. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to plan for tomorrow. Dr. Zephi had been traveling for 4 standard cycles to reach Earth, and, in all his years of interspecies medical practice, he had never encountered anything quite like human stubbornness. The species seemed determined to complicate even the simplest medical procedures with their emotional complexity and their peculiar relationship with mortality. Standing in the sterile corridors of New Geneva Medical Center 12 hours after his arrival, Zephi reviewed the cultural briefings he'd studied during his journey. Humans, according to the Galactic Medical Corps database, were remarkable for their resilience and their tendency to fight death until their final breath. The database had apparently never encountered a human holding poison while treatment was being offered. The briefing room was crowded with Earth's medical personnel, government officials, and what appeared to be military representatives. Humans, Zephi noted, seemed to require extensive committee discussions for even urgent medical matters. His own species, the Veltar, would have simply implemented the treatment immediately upon verification of its effectiveness. Dr. Harrison sat at the head of a long table, his face showing the strain of managing an unprecedented situation. "Dr. Zephi, we appreciate your assistance, but we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Your treatment appears to work, but we've had no prior contact with your people. How did you even know we needed help?" Zephi activated his personal translation device, which projected a 3-dimensional display above the table. The hologram showed a star map with pulsing red indicators scattered across multiple solar systems. "The Crimson Plague, as you call it, is not native to your world," he began. "It is a biological weapon created by a species known as the Devourers, beings who consume worlds by first weakening their populations with engineered diseases." The room fell silent. General Patricia Reeves, the military representative, leaned forward. "You're saying this plague was deliberately introduced to Earth?" "Correct. The Devourers follow a predictable pattern. They seed target worlds with various pathogens, then return once the population has been sufficiently reduced to begin their harvesting process. Dr. Martinez, who had been taking detailed notes, looked up sharply. Harvesting? What exactly do they harvest? Zephai's large eyes dimmed slightly, a sign of distress among his people. Everything. Biological matter, mineral resources, even the planet's electromagnetic field. They are, quite literally, world eaters. The implications hung heavy in the air. General Reeves spoke first. How long do we have? Based on their previous patterns, approximately 1 standard year after the initial outbreak. They will expect your population to be reduced by at least 70% before their harvesting fleets arrive. Dr. Harrison rubbed his temples. And, you're here to prevent that from happening? I am here because the Galactic Medical Corps has designated certain developing species as protected. Humanity has shown remarkable potential, particularly in your adaptability and your resistance to despair. These qualities make you valuable allies in our ongoing conflict with the Devourers. Zephai manipulated the holographic display, showing images of other worlds that had faced similar outbreaks. Some showed thriving civilizations that had overcome the plague. Others showed empty, scarred planets picked clean by the Devourers. The difference, he continued, was whether each species received treatment in time and whether they could mount an effective defense when the Devourers returned. General Reeves studied the images of devastated worlds. You said ongoing conflict. How long has this been happening? Approximately 3,000 of your years. The Devourers are nomadic, moving through the galaxy in vast fleets, consuming worlds to fuel their expansion. They target civilizations that have achieved interplanetary travel but have not yet developed effective defense systems. Dr. Martinez looked troubled. That describes humanity perfectly. We've colonized several worlds, but our military technology is still relatively primitive. Indeed. Which is why intervention was necessary. Zephai paused the holographic display on an image of a blue-green world that bore a striking resemblance to Earth. This is Kepler 438b, a world the Devourers attacked 50 standard cycles ago. The inhabitants, called the Yithmar, were remarkably similar to humans in their tenacity and creativity. The image shifted to show the same world as a barren wasteland. They refused treatment from the Galactic Medical Corps, believing they could solve the plague on their own. By the time they accepted help, their population had been reduced below the threshold for effective resistance. The room remained silent as the implications sank in. Zephai continued, however, the database did not prepare me for human behavior patterns. Patient Marcus Chen's reaction to treatment was unprecedented. Dr. Harrison looked confused. How so? In all recorded cases of devourer plague outbreaks, affected individuals fight for survival until their final moments. Marcus Chen was actively choosing death while treatment was being administered. This suggests either a fundamental misunderstanding in our cultural database or an evolution in human behavior that requires further study. Dr. Martinez spoke up. Marcus has been suffering for weeks. He'd already died twice and been resuscitated. His choice wasn't about giving up, it was about ending unbearable pain. Zephai's head tilted in what his species considered a gesture of deep contemplation. This concept of choosing death to avoid suffering rather than fighting until the end, it is not documented in our studies of human behavior. Maybe your studies were wrong about us, Dr. Martinez said quietly. This possibility disturbed Zephai more than he cared to admit. The Galactic Medical Corps prided itself on thorough cultural analysis before intervention. If they had misunderstood something so fundamental about human nature, what else might they have gotten wrong? The door to the briefing room opened, and Marcus Chen entered, supported by a nurse but walking under his own power. His transformation over the past 12 hours had been remarkable, even by Galactic Medical Corps standards. The crimson flush of the plague had faded completely, and, while he was still weak from weeks of illness, his vital signs had returned to near-normal ranges. Mr. Chen, Dr. Harrison said, standing to offer him a chair. How are you feeling? Marcus sat down carefully, still adjusting to his rapid recovery. Like I'd been hit by a cargo transport, but in a good way. He looked around the room, taking in the assembled officials and the holographic display still showing images of distant worlds. I take it this situation is more complicated than I thought. Considerably more, General Reeves replied. Dr. Zephi was just explaining that your plague was actually a biological weapon deployed by hostile aliens. Marcus absorbed this information with remarkable calm. Of course it was. Because apparently my week wasn't strange enough already. Zephi found himself oddly fascinated by Marcus's reaction. Most species, when informed that their world was under attack by cosmic predators, responded with panic, aggression, or denial. Marcus seemed to be treating it as merely another complication in an already difficult situation. Mr. Chen, Zephi said, may I ask why you chose to end your life rather than wait for treatment? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Have you ever experienced prolonged physical agony, Dr. Zephi? My species feels pain differently than humans. We experience it as data rather than suffering. Then, you might not understand. It wasn't about giving up hope. It was about choosing when and how to let go. Elena, my wife, she went through the same thing but died faster. I watched her suffer, and I didn't want to put myself or my daughter through that same prolonged dying process. Zephi processed this explanation, comparing it to his cultural database on human behavior. So your choice was made out of consideration for others' emotional welfare? Partly. But also because there's a difference between fighting to live and refusing to die. I'd been doing the second one for weeks, and it wasn't really living anymore. This distinction was entirely absent from Galactic Medical Corps protocols. Zephi made a mental note to request a complete revision of human behavioral studies when he returned to headquarters. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Dr. Zephi, you mentioned that humans show remarkable adaptability. What did you base that assessment on? Multiple factors, Zephi replied, manipulating the holographic display to show various data streams. Your species has successfully colonized worlds with significantly different environmental conditions from your origin world. You have developed effective solutions to problems using limited resources. Most importantly, you have shown the ability to work together across artificial divisions during crisis situations. General Reeves studied the data. But, apparently not well enough to resist these devourers on our own. Few species can, initially. The devourers have refined their tactics over millennia. However, those civilizations that survived their first encounter often become formidable allies. The key is surviving the initial assault. Marcus raised his hand slightly, still looking weak but alert. What exactly happens when these devourers arrive? The holographic display shifted to show massive, organic-looking ships that seemed more grown than built. Their harvesting fleets consist of biomechanical vessels that can strip a world's resources in a matter of days. They are particularly efficient at processing biological matter. They eat people, Marcus said flatly. Among other things, yes. The devourers require enormous amounts of organic material to maintain their fleets and continue their expansion. Populated worlds provide ideal feeding opportunities. Dr. Harrison looked pale. How many other species have you helped fight these creatures? 17 species have successfully resisted devourer incursions with Galactic Medical Corps assistance. 23 others. Zephi's display showed more images of barren worlds. Did not. The mathematics were stark and sobering. Less than a 50% survival rate, even with help. General Reeves stood and began pacing. What kind of military assistance can we expect? Ships, weapons, training? The Galactic Medical Corps is prohibited from providing military aid directly. However, we can share defensive technologies and tactical information. The actual fighting must be done by the threatened species themselves. Why? Dr. Martinez asked. If you have superior technology, why not just destroy the devourers yourselves? Zephi's expression became somber. Because we tried that approach once. The result was a galactic war that lasted 8 centuries and devastated dozens of civilizations. The current protocol of assistance rather than direct intervention was established to prevent such catastrophes from recurring. Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing the scope of what they were facing. So we're on our own, but with a little help from our cosmic neighbors. Essentially correct. And if we fail, everyone on Earth gets eaten by space monsters. That is an overly simplified but essentially accurate assessment. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the holographic images of destroyed worlds. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than fearful. You know what the really strange part is? 12 hours ago, I was ready to die rather than face another day of suffering. Now I'm looking at a year to prepare for a war that will determine whether our entire species survives. He looked around the room at the assembled faces. And, somehow, that feels less overwhelming than the plague did. Dr. Martinez looked confused. How is that possible? Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile HFY had seen from him. Because the plague was just about me dying slowly and painfully. This is about all of us living or dying together. That's something worth fighting for. HFY found himself reconsidering everything in his database about human psychology. Perhaps the key to understanding this species wasn't in their individual behaviors but in their collective responses to existential threats. General Reeves returned to her seat. Dr. HFY, what's our first step? How do we begin preparing for an invasion by creatures we've never seen using technology we don't understand? We begin with mass treatment to eliminate the plague. A healthy population is essential for effective defense. Then, we begin adapting your existing technology using principles I can share with your scientists. Dr. Harrison nodded. How long will the mass treatment take? With proper distribution methods, we can treat your entire colonial population within 30 standard days. However, this assumes cooperation from your governmental and medical institutions. You'll have it, General Reeves said firmly. I can speak for the Colonial Defense Force, and I'm confident EarthGov will provide full support once they understand the situation. HFY activated another display showing treatment distribution logistics. Excellent. We should begin immediately with your most populated colonies and work outward to smaller settlements. Marcus stood slowly, still weak but determined. What can I do to help? The question surprised HFY. Mr. Chen, you are still recovering. You should rest and regain your strength. Dr. HFY, with respect, I've been dying for weeks. Now I'm getting a chance to live and help save everyone else who's suffering like I was. Rest can wait. Again, HFY found human behavior patterns defying his expectations. Most recovering patients would gladly accept an excuse to avoid additional stress. Marcus seemed to be seeking it out. If you insist on helping, HFY said carefully, your experience as both a patient and a survivor could be valuable in convincing others to accept treatment. Many of your kind seem to distrust new medical procedures. Dr. Martinez nodded. He's right. We're going to face resistance from people who don't trust alien medicine, no matter how effective it is. Marcus looked thoughtful. I can work with that. Nothing convinces people like seeing someone who was dying yesterday walking around healthy today. General Reeves stood again. Then, we have our initial plan. Mass treatment, technology transfer, and preparation for defense. Dr. HFY, how much time do we have before we need to be ready? The Devourer fleets move slowly between star systems. Based on their projected course from their last known position, approximately 11 of your months remain. 11 months to save human civilization. HFY watched the faces around the room as they absorbed this timeline. Fear was present, certainly, but it was tempered by determination and something his database identified as stubborn optimism. Perhaps the cultural briefings had been correct about human resilience after all. They simply hadn't accounted for the peculiar ways that resilience manifested itself. As the meeting broke up into smaller groups discussing logistics and implementation, HFY found himself standing beside Marcus, who was studying the holographic images of successful worlds that had resisted devourer attacks. "Dr. HFY," Marcus said quietly, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. When you saw me with that berry, ready to end my life while you were offering to save it, what did you think?" HFY considered the question carefully. "I thought that perhaps my database was incomplete, or that I had misunderstood something fundamental about your species." Marcus nodded. "Maybe you did. Maybe we're not as simple as your studies suggested. That is becoming increasingly apparent." "Good," Marcus said, still looking at the images of distant worlds. "Because if we're going to survive what's coming, we're going to need to be more complex and unpredictable than your enemies expect." As HFY watched this human who had chosen death and, then, chosen life again, he began to think that perhaps humanity's chances were better than the statistical models suggested. After all, any species capable of surprising a galactic medical corps physician might just be capable of surprising the devourers as well. 3 weeks after his miraculous recovery, Marcus Chen stood in the observation deck of New Geneva's primary medical facility, watching the organized chaos that had become his world. Below him, treatment centers operated around the clock, processing thousands of plague victims daily. The blue glow of HFY's nanobiological devices had become as common as sunlight in the corridors. The cure was working. That was undeniable. But Marcus was beginning to understand that saving humanity from one threat might have exposed them to something far more complex than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Martinez appeared beside him, carrying a tablet full of data that had been keeping her awake for days. "The numbers are incredible, Marcus. We've treated over 40,000 patients in the past 3 weeks, with a 97% recovery rate." Marcus nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "What about the 3%? Sarah's face darkened. "That's the problem we're trying to understand. The treatment doesn't work on everyone. Some patients show temporary improvement and, then, relapse. Others don't respond at all. This was the complication that no one had anticipated. HFY's treatment, while miraculous for most humans, seemed to have limitations that even the Galactic Medical Corps hadn't encountered before." Marcus had been following the research closely, partly out of scientific curiosity and partly because he felt responsible as the first successful patient. "Has Dr. HFY offered any explanations? He's as puzzled as we are. According to him, the treatment has never failed on this scale before. Something about human genetics is interfering with the nanobiological agents in ways they didn't predict." Marcus watched a group of patients being wheeled into the treatment center below. Most would walk out healthy within hours. But, statistically, 1 or 2 would not improve, and their families would face the same despair he had felt weeks ago. The door to the observation deck opened, and Dr. HFY entered, his tall form seeming to fill the space. Over the past weeks, Marcus had learned to read some of the alien's expressions. The slight dimming of his large eyes indicated stress or concern. "Mr. Chen, Dr. Martinez. I hoped I would find you here. We need to discuss a development that has emerged from our treatment program." Sarah looked up from her tablet. "Let me guess. More complications with the non-responsive patients?" "Unfortunately, yes. But also something potentially more significant." HFY activated a portable holographic display, showing genetic sequences that meant little to Marcus but clearly concerned Dr. Martinez. "What am I looking at?" Marcus asked. "Human genetic variations that appear to confer resistance to both the plague and our treatment," HFY explained. "Approximately 3% of your population carries genetic markers that make them functionally immune to devourer biological weapons." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, studying the data. "Immune? You mean they never get sick in the first place?" "Correct. These individuals show no symptoms when exposed to the plague organism. However, they also do not respond to our nanobiological treatment. Their immune systems actively reject the healing agents." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. That sounds like good news and bad news rolled into one package. Indeed. The good news is that a portion of your species would survive even without our intervention. The bad news is that these same individuals cannot benefit from the defensive enhancements our treatment provides. This was the first Marcus had heard of defensive enhancements. What kind of enhancements? HFY manipulated the display to show cellular structures that looked far more complex than normal human biology. The nanobiological agents do not simply cure the plague. They remain in the system, providing ongoing protection against biological weapons and enhanced healing capabilities. Treated individuals also show improved resistance to radiation and other environmental hazards. Dr. Martinez stared at the display in shock. You've been enhancing our biology? Making us more resistant to the conditions we might face during a devourer attack? It is standard protocol for species facing such threats. The enhancements are subtle but significant. Treated humans should be able to survive in environments that would normally be lethal. Marcus felt a mixture of gratitude and unease. So those of us who received treatment aren't just cured. We're upgraded? That is an accurate description. However, the 3% who show natural immunity cannot receive these enhancements. They remain vulnerable to environmental hazards that treated humans could survive. The implications were staggering. Humanity was essentially being divided into two groups, the enhanced majority who had received treatment, and the naturally immune minority who remained unmodified. Marcus could already see the potential for social divisions that could tear their species apart just when unity was most needed. How many people are we talking about? Dr. Martinez asked. Based on current population estimates, approximately 200 million individuals across all human colonies. 200 million people who would be left behind if the enhancements proved crucial for survival. Marcus thought about the ethical implications and felt a headache building. Dr. HFY, he said carefully, why didn't you mention these enhancements when you first offered treatment? The alien's expression became what Marcus had learned to recognize as apologetic. Cultural protocols require that we focus on immediate medical needs rather than overwhelming patients with long-term implications. Most species prefer to learn about enhancements gradually as they become relevant. Most species, Dr. Martinez repeated. But not humans? Apparently not. Your species seems to prefer comprehensive information regardless of the psychological burden it creates. Marcus almost laughed at the accuracy of that assessment. Humans did tend to want all the bad news at once, rather than having it doled out in manageable portions. The observation deck door opened again, and General Reeves entered with a man Marcus didn't recognize. The newcomer was tall, pale, and had an intensity about him that suggested military background. Dr. HFY, perfect timing, General Reeves said. I'd like you to meet Colonel James Harrison. He's been coordinating our defense preparation efforts. Colonel Harrison stepped forward, extending his hand to the alien, who accepted the gesture with practiced ease. Dr. HFY, I've been reviewing your data on devourer tactics. I have concerns about our current preparation strategy. What kind of concerns? Marcus asked. Harrison activated his own display device, showing strategic projections that made Marcus's headache worse. According to Dr. HFY's information, the devourers typically arrive with overwhelming force, expecting minimal resistance from weakened populations. But we're not going to be weakened, are we? HFY's eyes brightened slightly. No. With treatment, humanity should maintain close to full population strength. Which means, Harrison continued, that we're changing the fundamental assumptions their battle plans are based on. They're expecting to face scattered groups of survivors. Instead, they'll encounter organized resistance from an enhanced population. Dr. Martinez looked confused. That sounds like good news. It is, in the short term. But it also means they might adjust their tactics accordingly. Dr. HFY, in your experience, how do the devourers respond when they encounter unexpected resistance? HFY was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see the alien processing implications he might not have fully considered. In most cases, they simply apply more force. However, there have been instances where they have called for additional fleet elements. General Reeves leaned against the observation window. Meaning? Meaning they might bring a significantly larger invasion force than originally planned. The timeline could also be accelerated. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this possibility. Marcus felt the weight of unintended consequences settling on his shoulders. By accepting treatment and encouraging others to do the same, had they inadvertently made Earth's situation worse? Colonel Harrison continued his analysis. There's another complication. These naturally immune individuals you've identified. If they can't receive enhancements, they'll be at a significant disadvantage during combat operations. We could develop alternative enhancement methods, Dr. Martinez suggested. Traditional medical approaches, maybe genetic therapy. In 11 months? Harrison shook his head. Even if we could develop alternatives, we don't have time to test them properly. Marcus watched the discussion unfold and felt a familiar sensation. It was the same feeling he'd experienced while holding the deathberry, weighing an impossible choice with no clear right answer. The difference was that this time, the choice affected not just him but the entire human species. What if we're approaching this wrong? He said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Marcus realized he had their full attention and felt the pressure of it. I mean, we're thinking about this as a military problem. Enhanced humans versus non-enhanced humans, optimal resistance strategies, force multipliers. But maybe the answer isn't in making everyone the same. Dr. Zephi tilted his head in the gesture Marcus had learned indicated deep interest. Please elaborate. Marcus moved to the window, looking down at the treatment centers where the future of humanity was being determined one patient at a time. The naturally immune people have something we don't, right? They survived the plague without any help. That suggests they might have other advantages we haven't discovered yet. Colonel Harrison frowned. What kind of advantages? I don't know. But think about it. Evolution doesn't usually create resistance to specific threats unless there's been some kind of exposure or selective pressure. Why would 3% of humans be naturally immune to alien biological weapons? Dr. Martinez looked thoughtful. He has a point. Genetic immunity to engineered pathogens isn't something that develops by accident. Zephi activated his display again, pulling up genetic analysis data. Your suggestion has merit. We have been focusing on what the naturally immune cannot do rather than what they might be uniquely capable of. General Reeves stepped closer to the display. Are you suggesting that some humans might have natural abilities that would be useful against the Devourers? I'm suggesting we don't know enough about what makes those 3% different, Marcus replied. Maybe they can't be enhanced by nanobiological agents because they're already enhanced by something else. The idea hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they understood about the situation. Zephi manipulated his display, running new analysis protocols on the genetic data. This is unexpected, he said after several minutes. The genetic markers we identified as conferring immunity are not random mutations. They appear to be purposeful modifications, as if someone deliberately engineered them into your species' genome. Dr. Martinez stared at the data. Engineered by whom? Unknown. But the modifications are extremely sophisticated. Far beyond anything your current technology could produce. Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. Dr. Zephi, how long have the Devourers been operating in this galaxy? Approximately 3,000 standard years. And how long have they known about Earth? Zephi paused, clearly considering implications he hadn't thought through before. Unknown. However, their intelligence-gathering methods are quite advanced. It is possible they have been monitoring your world for much longer than we realized. Colonel Harrison caught on to Marcus's line of thinking. You're suggesting that someone might have modified human genetics to resist devourer weapons before the current threat emerged? I'm suggesting we might not be as alone as we thought, Marcus replied. And maybe the reason 3% of us are naturally immune isn't an accident. The observation deck fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Instead of the weight of overwhelming problems, there was a sense of possibilities opening up. General Reeves spoke first. Dr. Zephi, could these genetic modifications have been made by other species? Members of your Galactic Medical Corps? The Corps does not engage in preemptive genetic modification of developing species. It would be a violation of our Corps protocols. Then, who? Dr. Martinez asked. Zephi's expression became unreadable. There are older species in the galaxy. Some who no longer interact openly with younger civilizations. It is possible that one of them took an interest in humanity long before the current crisis. Marcus turned back to the window, watching the steady flow of patients receiving treatment. 3% would emerge unmodified, carrying genetic gifts from unknown benefactors. The rest would carry nanobiological enhancements from a species of cosmic healers. Together, they would face an enemy that consumed worlds. We need to find these naturally immune people, he said. Not to exclude them from anything, but to understand what they can do that the rest of us can't. Colonel Harrison nodded. Agreed. If they're carrying hidden advantages, we need to know what they are before the Devourers arrive. Dr. Zephi began closing his displays. I will request additional resources from the Galactic Medical Corps. This development requires comprehensive study. As the group began making plans for expanded research, Marcus remained at the window. 3 weeks ago, he had been ready to die rather than face another day of suffering. Now he was part of a species-wide transformation that might determine humanity's survival. The cure had come with a price, but maybe that price wasn't as simple as they had thought. Maybe it wasn't just about dividing humanity into enhanced and unenhanced. Maybe it was about discovering what humanity had always been capable of, hidden in their genetics by unknown guardians. Looking down at the treatment centers, Marcus allowed himself a moment of hope. They were no longer just treating a plague. They were uncovering the secret history of their species and preparing for a war that would define their place in the galaxy. The deathberries in his old hospital room seemed like relics from another lifetime. Now, instead of choosing between life and death, humanity was choosing what kind of life they wanted to become. 6 weeks after first contact with Dr. Zephi, Marcus Chun found himself in the most unlikely place imaginable, a converted warehouse on the outskirts of New Geneva that had become the epicenter of humanity's most important scientific discovery. The facility buzzed with activity as researchers from dozens of worlds worked alongside Earth's finest scientists to unravel the mystery of the naturally immune. What they had discovered was changing everything humanity thought they knew about themselves. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the project's lead geneticist, stood before a massive holographic display showing DNA sequences that seemed to pulse with their own inner logic. She was one of the naturally immune, discovered during the initial screening process, and had become the first subject of intensive study. The modifications are breathtaking, she said to the assembled team. Not just random immune responses, but a complete enhancement of human potential that's been dormant for generations. Marcus sat in the front row, still adjusting to his role as liaison between the enhanced and unenhanced populations. Dr. Zephi occupied a specially constructed chair beside him, his alien features reflecting fascination that transcended species boundaries. Dr. Vasquez, called out Dr. Harrison from the back of the room, can you explain in layman's terms what exactly these genetic modifications do? Elena manipulated the display, zooming in on specific genetic sequences. Imagine human DNA as a complex machine with certain components deliberately disabled. The naturally immune don't just resist the plague. They have activated genes that give them enhanced cognitive processing, improved physical coordination, and, most remarkably, limited telepathic abilities. The room erupted in excited murmurs. Telepathy had been theoretical for humans, something relegated to science fiction rather than serious scientific discussion. General Reeves leaned forward. Telepathic abilities? How limited are we talking about? Elena smiled, and Marcus noticed something different about her expression. There was a depth to it that hadn't been there weeks before, as if she was seeing more than just what was visible in the room. I can sense the emotional states of people within about 50 meters, she said. Not thoughts exactly, but intentions, fears, excitement. It's like having an additional sense that tells me what people are feeling beneath what they're saying. Dr. Zephai's eyes brightened with interest. This explains why the nanobiological agents cannot integrate with naturally immune systems. The genetic modifications create a form of biological interference that prevents foreign enhancement. Marcus raised his hand. Dr. Vasquez, you said these modifications have been dormant for generations. Does that mean all humans carry them? Every human has the genetic sequences, but only 3% have them activated. We're still trying to understand what triggers the activation. Colonel Harrison, who had been coordinating defense preparations, stood up from his seat. Are these abilities useful in combat situations? Elena considered the question carefully. The enhanced awareness could be incredibly valuable for tactical operations. If someone can sense enemy intentions or detect hidden threats through emotional signatures, that's a significant advantage. But, Dr. Zephai interjected, the naturally immune remain vulnerable to environmental hazards that enhanced humans can survive. This creates a complex strategic situation. Marcus had been thinking about this problem for weeks. Two populations with complementary but incompatible advantages. The enhanced could survive harsh conditions but lack the intuitive abilities of the naturally immune. Meanwhile, the naturally immune could potentially predict enemy behavior but couldn't survive the environmental chaos of a devourer attack. What if we're thinking about this backwards? Marcus said, standing up. Instead of seeing this as a problem of incompatible enhancements, what if it's meant to be a symbiotic relationship? Dr. Vasquez turned to look at him, and Marcus felt an odd sensation, as if she was reading something beyond his words. Explain what you mean. Marcus moved to the holographic display, gesturing at the genetic data. Look at the percentages. 3% naturally immune, 97% enhanced. That's not random. If someone engineered these modifications, they designed them to create two complementary populations. Zephai activated his own display, overlaying tactical analysis data. Mr. Chen may be correct. Most successful resistance movements against the devourers have relied on mixed populations with diverse capabilities. General Reeves was taking notes rapidly. So you're suggesting integrated units? Enhanced soldiers who can survive harsh environments working with naturally immune individuals who can predict enemy behavior? More than that, Marcus replied. I think the whole system was designed to force cooperation between different types of humans. The genetic modifications don't just give us abilities. They give us complementary abilities that only work when we work together. Elena was studying the genetic data with renewed focus. That would explain the complexity of the modifications. They're not just random improvements. They're specifically designed to create interdependence. Dr. Martinez, who had been monitoring the enhanced population's adaptation to their new abilities, spoke up from her position near the back of the room. We've been seeing interesting developments among the enhanced as well. Improved healing rates, resistance to toxins, enhanced physical endurance. But also increased empathy and cooperative behavior. Zephai tilted his head in the gesture Marcus had learned indicated deep consideration. The nanobiological agents were designed to enhance survival capabilities. If they are also promoting cooperative behavior, that is not a side effect we anticipated. Maybe it's not a side effect, Marcus suggested. Maybe whoever created the genetic modifications knew that any enhancement would need to include improved cooperation to be effective. The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. They weren't just dealing with random evolutionary advantages. Someone had apparently spent considerable effort designing humanity to function as an integrated species with complementary capabilities. Colonel Harrison stood up. Dr. Zephai, in your experience with other species, have you ever encountered anything like this? Deliberate genetic engineering designed to create cooperative populations? Zephai was quiet for a long moment. There are legends among the older species about the architects, beings who supposedly guided the development of younger civilizations in preparation for galactic threats. But they are considered myths, stories told to explain coincidences in evolution. What if they're not myths? Elena asked. What if the architects were real, and they modified human genetics to prepare us for exactly this situation? Dr. Martinez pulled up her own data on enhanced population behavior. It would explain a lot. The enhanced humans are showing increased protective instincts, not just for themselves but for others. Meanwhile, the naturally immune are developing stronger emotional connections to larger groups rather than just immediate family. Marcus felt pieces of a vast puzzle clicking together. We're being programmed to care about each other more. The enhancements don't just make us stronger individually. They make us more invested in collective survival. General Reeves was making rapid calculations on her tablet. If this is true, if we're dealing with species-wide modifications designed to create cooperation, then our defense strategy needs to account for that. Colonel Harrison nodded. Integrated command structures, mixed units, shared responsibility for both enhanced and naturally immune populations. But there's something else, Elena said, her expression troubled. The genetic modifications include inactive sequences that could potentially be triggered by specific stimuli. We don't know what would activate them or what they would do. Zephai's display suddenly activated without his input, showing incoming data from the Galactic Medical Corps. His expression became grave as he processed the information. What is it? Marcus asked. Long-range sensors have detected Devourer fleet movements. They are approaching this system faster than projected. The room erupted in concerned voices, but Marcus felt an odd calm settling over him. How much faster? Instead of 11 months, we may have only 6. 6 months to complete humanity's transformation and prepare for an invasion that would determine their survival. Marcus looked around the room at the mix of enhanced and naturally immune humans working alongside an alien physician who had traveled across the galaxy to help them. Dr. Vasquez, he said, those inactive genetic sequences you mentioned. Is there any way to determine what might trigger them? Elena was already pulling up new data streams. Extreme stress, mortal danger, species-level threats, the activation triggers seem to be tied to survival situations. Like an impending invasion by world-eating aliens? That would certainly qualify. Marcus turned to address the entire room. Then, maybe we're not behind schedule. Maybe we're exactly where we need to be. The genetic modifications, the alien treatment, the accelerated timeline, what if all of this was planned by whoever set this in motion? Dr. Zephai reviewed his incoming data more carefully. There is something unusual about the Devourer fleet movement. They are not following standard invasion patterns. Their approach vector suggests they expect to encounter significant resistance. General Reeves looked up sharply. They know we've been enhanced? It appears so. Which means they are bringing additional force to compensate. Instead of despair, Marcus felt a surge of anticipation. Then, they're worried about us. Whatever we're becoming, it's enough to concern species that have conquered worlds for thousands of years. Elena was studying the genetic data with increased intensity. Marcus, you might be right. The inactive sequences, they're showing increased activity in response to stress hormones that are elevated throughout the enhanced population. The approach of the Devourer fleet might be exactly what's needed to trigger the final stage of modification. Colonel Harrison stood up abruptly. Final stage? What kind of final stage? Unknown. But the genetic architecture suggests capabilities far beyond what we've seen so far. Enhanced healing, improved cognitive function, and the telepathic abilities of the naturally immune might just be the beginning. Marcus felt a familiar sensation, the same feeling he'd experienced when choosing between the Deathberry and Dr. Zephai's treatment. But, this time, instead of choosing between life and death, humanity was choosing what kind of life they would become. Dr. Zephai, he said, has the Galactic Medical Corps ever encountered a species that was genetically prepared for Devourer attacks before those attacks occurred? Zephai's silence stretched long enough to become an answer in itself. When he finally spoke, his voice carried wonder. No. Never. Most species require extensive enhancement to survive initial contact. You are the first to show evidence of pre-existing preparation. Which means Which means that someone has been watching over humanity for a very long time, and they have been preparing you for this moment specifically. Elena looked up from her genetic displays. The question is, are we ready for whatever we're about to become? Marcus looked around the room at the faces of enhanced and naturally immune humans working together to understand their shared destiny. 6 months to complete a transformation that had been set in motion by unknown guardians, possibly centuries ago. We'd better be, he said. Because ready or not, we're about to find out what we were really designed to do. Outside the converted warehouse, ships continued arriving at the spaceport, bringing refugees from outer colonies and supplies for the coming conflict. But, for the first time since Dr. Zephai's arrival, Marcus felt like they weren't just reacting to events. They were becoming what they had always been meant to be. And, whatever that was, it was enough to make the Devourers change their plans. That had to count for something. 3 months before the projected arrival of the Devourer fleet, Marcus Chen stood on the command deck of humanity's first truly integrated defense station, watching something that shouldn't have been possible. Below him, enhanced and naturally immune humans worked in seamless coordination, their different abilities creating a collective intelligence that transcended what either group could achieve alone. The transformation had accelerated beyond all predictions. Elena Vasquez approached from the tactical station, her presence announcing itself before she spoke. Marcus had learned to recognize the subtle telepathic signature that the naturally immune projected when they were excited about something important. Marcus, we've made a breakthrough with the dormant genetic sequences, she said, her eyes bright with discovery. And, it's bigger than anything we imagined. Dr. Zephai looked up from his analysis station, where he had been coordinating with Galactic Medical Corps researchers across multiple star systems. The final genetic activation has begun? Not just activation, Elena replied, moving to the central holographic display. Evolution. Real-time evolution triggered by the approaching threat. She activated the display, showing genetic sequences that were visibly changing as they watched. The inactive DNA isn't just switching on. It's adapting, rewriting itself based on the specific challenges we're facing. Marcus stared at the flowing genetic patterns. Adapting how? Look at this, Elena manipulated the display to show specific modifications. Enhanced humans are developing improved coordination with naturally immune partners. Meanwhile, naturally immune individuals are showing increased resistance to environmental hazards. Dr. Zephai's expression showed the alien equivalent of amazement. The genetic modifications are cross-training themselves. Each population is developing aspects of the other's advantages while maintaining their unique capabilities. General Reeves entered the command center, followed by Colonel Harrison and a woman Marcus didn't recognize. The newcomer had the bearing of someone accustomed to command, but there was something different about her. She moved with the fluid grace of enhanced physiology, but her eyes held the depth that Marcus had learned to associate with naturally immune perception. Dr. Vasquez, Mr. Chen, General Reeves said, I'd like you to meet Admiral Sarah Chen. She's been coordinating our outer colony defenses. Marcus did a double take. Chen? Are we related? Admiral Chen smiled, and Marcus felt an immediate sense of connection that went beyond mere family resemblance. Distantly, probably. But, more importantly, I'm one of the first confirmed cases of spontaneous hybrid development. Elena's eyes widened. Hybrid development? I was originally enhanced, received Dr. Zephai's treatment in the second wave. But, over the past month, I've been developing naturally immune characteristics. Limited telepathy, enhanced pattern recognition, emotional sensing. Dr. Zephai immediately activated his scanners. This should not be possible. The nanobiological agents specifically prevent the development of naturally immune characteristics. Admiral Chen submitted to the scan with practiced ease. Apparently, someone forgot to tell my DNA about that limitation. The results appeared on Zephai's display, and Marcus could see the alien physician's excitement building. Extraordinary. Your nanobiological enhancement has been completely rewritten by your genetic modifications. Instead of preventing natural development, it has been converted to accelerate it. Marcus felt a familiar sensation, the same anticipation he'd experienced when choosing to accept treatment instead of the deathberry. How many others? That's why I'm here, Admiral Chen replied. We've identified over 200 cases of hybrid development across the colonial fleet. The transformation is accelerating, and it's not random. Elena was already pulling up population data. The hybrid cases, they're all individuals who showed strong cooperative behaviors during the initial treatment phase. Colonel Harrison stepped closer to the display. Meaning? Meaning the genetic modifications are selecting for cooperation, Marcus said, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. People who work well with both enhanced and naturally immune populations are developing characteristics of both groups. Dr. Zephi was processing the implications faster than the humans could vocalize them. If this trend continues, humanity will develop into a truly integrated species with flexible capabilities. The three distinct populations will become stepping stones to something entirely new. General Reeves activated her own tactical display, showing the approaching Devourer fleet. Which is good, because our intelligence suggests they're bringing their biggest guns. Fleet composition indicates this isn't a standard harvesting operation. The tactical display showed massive biomechanical ships that dwarfed anything in the human defense fleet. But, more concerning were the support vessels, structures that seemed designed for planetary siege rather than quick resource extraction. Admiral Chen studied the fleet composition with the analytical depth that Marcus was learning to recognize in hybrid individuals. They're not just planning to harvest Earth. They're planning to make an example of us. Meaning? Marcus asked. Meaning they've identified humanity as a potential threat to their expansion. This isn't about resources anymore. It's about preventing us from becoming something that could challenge them. Elena was correlating genetic development data with fleet intelligence. The timeline makes sense. The genetic modifications were designed to activate in response to existential threats. The Devourers represent the ultimate existential threat, so we're undergoing the ultimate transformation. Marcus moved to the observation windows, looking out at the defense fleet that humanity had assembled in just 6 months. Ships from dozens of colonies worked alongside Galactic Medical Corps support vessels, while hybrid crews coordinated defenses using abilities that hadn't existed a year ago. Dr. Zephi, he said, in all your experience with species-facing Devourer attacks, have you ever seen anything like what's happening to us? Zephi was quiet for a long moment. No. Most species either accept enhancement or develop natural resistance. None have ever achieved integration of both approaches while simultaneously evolving new capabilities. Which means we have no statistical models for predicting the outcome of this conflict. Humanity has become an unknown variable in equations that have remained constant for thousands of years. Admiral Chen approached the tactical display, her hybrid perception apparently picking up patterns that others had missed. There's something else. The Devourer fleet formation includes vessels we've never seen before. Ships that appear to be designed specifically for fighting enhanced populations. Colonel Harrison leaned closer. They've adapted their tactics to counter our treatment? Exactly. But, they're still operating under the assumption that we're either enhanced or naturally immune. They haven't accounted for hybrid development. Elena was running new genetic projections based on the latest data. According to current trends, we could see 50% hybrid development within the next 2 months. By the time the Devourers arrive, humanity might be a fundamentally different species than when they started planning this attack. Marcus felt the weight of unprecedented responsibility settling on his shoulders. As the first successfully treated patient, he had become a symbol of humanity's transformation. But, symbols, he was learning, carried obligations that went far beyond personal survival. Dr. Zephi, he said, I need to ask you something that might be uncomfortable. If humanity succeeds in defeating the Devourers, if we become something new and powerful in the galaxy, what happens to the balance of power that your people have worked to maintain? The alien physician's expression became unreadable. That is a question the Galactic Medical Corps has been debating since your hybrid development was confirmed. General Reeves turned to face Zephi directly. Are you saying that helping us might have consequences for galactic stability? I am saying that we may have underestimated what humanity was designed to become. The species that created your genetic modifications clearly intended you to be more than just another civilization that survives devourer attacks. Admiral Chen's hybrid perception was apparently picking up undercurrents in the conversation that others had missed. Dr. Zephai, there's something you're not telling us about these architects, isn't there? Zephai's hesitation confirmed her suspicion before he spoke. The architects are not entirely mythical. They were real, but they disappeared from the galaxy approximately 5,000 years ago. Most species assume they ascended to a higher form of existence. But you don't think so, Marcus said. I think they were eliminated by the devourers because they represented a threat to devourer expansion. The genetic modifications they left behind in various species were meant to eventually produce populations capable of continuing their work. Elena looked up from her genetic analysis. Their work of what? Creating an integrated galactic civilization that could permanently end the devourer threat. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were potentially the culmination of a 5,000-year plan to create a species capable of ending the greatest threat the galaxy had known. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of standing at a crossroads between different versions of the future. But, this time, the choice wasn't just about his own life or death. It was about what humanity would become and what that meant for every other species in the galaxy. Dr. Zephai, he said, if we succeed, if we defeat the devourers and fulfill whatever the architects intended, what happens to us? Do we become the new guardians of the galaxy? That is a choice humanity will have to make for itself. But, yes, success in this conflict will likely establish you as one of the galaxy's dominant species. Admiral Chen stepped forward, her hybrid abilities apparently giving her insight into the collective mood of everyone in the room. Then, we need to make sure we become the kind of dominant species that the galaxy can live with. Marcus nodded, thinking about the deathberries he had almost chosen instead of Dr. Zephai's treatment. The transformation that began with that choice had led humanity to this moment, where they were potentially hours away from becoming something unprecedented in galactic history. Elena, he said, what does the latest genetic analysis say about our capabilities? What exactly are we becoming? Elena activated a new display showing the integrated capabilities of hybrid humans. Enhanced physical abilities, environmental resistance, telepathic communication, pattern recognition that borders on precognition, and, most importantly, an instinctive drive toward cooperation that seems to override tribal and territorial impulses. We're becoming what we need to be, Marcus realized. Not just to survive the devourers, but to create a civilization that doesn't repeat their mistakes. Dr. Zephai reviewed his communications from the Galactic Medical Corps. There is news from our long-range sensors. The Devourer fleet has accelerated again. Arrival is now projected in 6 weeks. 6 weeks for humanity to complete a transformation that had been 5,000 years in the making. Marcus looked around the command center at the hybrid crews working in seamless coordination, enhanced and naturally immune humans supporting each other's abilities, and an alien physician who had traveled across the galaxy to help them become what they were meant to be. Then, we'd better finish becoming, he said. Because whatever the architects designed us to be, we're about to find out if it's enough. Outside the command center, the defense fleet continued its preparations, but Marcus could see something different in their movements. The ships weren't just positioning for battle. They were moving like parts of a living organism, responding to threats and opportunities with a collective intelligence that transcended individual crews. Humanity was becoming something new. Whether it would be enough to end a 5,000-year threat remained to be seen. But, for the first time since Dr. Zephai's arrival, Marcus felt like they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to become worthy of the gift they had been given, and, to prove that sometimes, the choice between life and death was really the choice between what you were and what you could become. The deathberries seemed like ancient history now. Instead of choosing death to avoid suffering, humanity had chosen transformation to ensure that.